Ladies and gentlemen, can you please make your way to your seats when you've grabbed your wine? Have a seat, please. There's an extra chair now, so I'll sit down. And you can, So anyway, in fact, it gives you. It's all of a sudden got very quiet in here. Welcome everyone to Craniofacial Australia's Thank You event. Before we get started, I wish to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we pay respect to elders past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, their beliefs and relationship with the land, and we acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. So welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people here. I think you will find the evening very, very interesting. So we'll have panelists here talking about their lived experience, and we've got researchers talking about their research. But before we start, we're going to show our corporate video, which will give you a bit of an insight to where we're at, what we do, and how we do it.
So the first time that I actually realized that I was different, I think I I was about 5 or 6 when Mom told me that I came back for kindy. And so I came back and I just, put my bag away and went to the mirror to look.
My eyes are wide open. I see you clear.
Questions start coming into my head, So what happened to me? Why am I like this? Why am I different?
Touch the same floor. Our world has been
Established in 1984, Craniofacial Australia is a not-for-profit charitable foundation that was founded by South Australian of the Decade, Professor David AC.
Probably the best example that I can think of, a little boy who had a facial deformity, and he was in a village in a developing country. They didn't know what to do with him, and so he was tied up outside while everybody else went about their daily work. He had no language. He just used to grunt and make noises. Some people came upon him, and so they managed to bring him to Australia. And that young man underwent a series of the most complicated medical interventions and support, and ultimately he has a full and prosperous life.
The organisation's vision is to support patients through their journey, advance discovery into craniofacial care, and educate and train health professionals.
Human beings with these craniofacial deformities who have been considered to be worthless in the past, locked up in madhouses, now are shown to be highly intelligent, capable of having full and productive lives. And even if you are the sort of person who thinks only in terms of their economic excellence, then that checks out as well. They will produce more than they take.
How we support patients is really from the time of diagnosis. So when a child is born and there's an obvious deformity, that is a huge impact on the mother and the father and their family. They had such big dreams for their child, and then they get presented with an issue which they weren't expecting. So from that point onwards, it's a real battle for parents. And then over time, they need support to go to operations, they need support to go to appointments, they need support to travel to gain medical service.
The suture in Harvey's skull was fused too early, and that means that there's no room for the brain to grow. The night before the surgery really hit me, and I didn't get much sleep. I was questioning whether it was something that I had done through pregnancy that could have caused the issue. When I reached out to Craniofacial Australia and they sent through the care package, we got given a blanket that was stitched by people in South Australia that don't know my child. Like, there was toys, like there was a little t-shirt that says that he's a cranio warrior. So that was really nice and made us feel like the journey wasn't just our journey.
I lost count how many surgeries I had. I think it was around a dozen.
Hello. Had I not had any of the surgeries, I wouldn't have been able to eat. Food wouldn't necessarily have gone down, and you could see all the way to the back of my throat. That would have made me feel ashamed, and I wouldn't have wanted to engage with the world.
Craniofacial Foundation has provided us some funding. What the funding has given us is the ability to employ people within the laboratory and also to buy in the resources that we need to perform the experiments on some of our model systems. We want to understand how disorders arise so that we can try and fix them. But even better for us would be to try and stop the disease before it arises. Right? So if we can get preventative medicines in place, that would be our major outcome.
In relation to children with craniofacial conditions, my research is about understanding how they're doing with their emotional well-being, and then of course working out what we should be doing to help people who have difficulties in those areas. I think parents really appreciate understanding more about what a craniofacial diagnosis means for their child's future.
Children with craniosynostosis could have various mutations. What this causes is an overgrowth of bone in the plates in the cranium. So what we're trying to do is shut that process down by inhibiting the bone forming process in these growth plates, and that allows the brain to grow naturally to its full potential. It's been quite exciting actually. The money that we've got from the Craniofacial Foundation and also from the NHMRC has allowed us to progress in this field, and we've been able to actually inhibit the fusion of the sutures. The research that we're doing is leading the field in this area, and hopefully we can either reduce the types of surgeries that have been done or eliminate those in the future.
Education is really needed in this work because of the very rare nature of the craniofacial deformity. A lot of this work was sorted out in the early 1960s. Professor David spoke of Portesia. Then literally the next level would be Prof David, and he was one of the first to do this work within Australia. Now that knowledge and experience has been handed down, and it's important for us to continue that educational process because the outcomes for patients are much better.
We, for example, Zoom teaching to Indonesian surgeons, 215 of them, every week to support them in their education and in their patient management, giving them advice, etc. And those relationships produce wonderful outcomes.
We're so lucky here in Australia to be able to, have a foundation that does lead, craniofacial surgery and research and evidence-based, stuff all over the world. That message is being spread overseas, and all the young kids and the families overseas also get the amazing support that we have available to us here in Australia. It's really important because it literally changes lives.
These craniofacial surgeries are life-changing, and the main reason is that you take someone with significant deformity who has lost their confidence or have had people treat them in a different manner, then improving their appearance and improving the way their own self-perception is extremely important, and I think is life-changing.
We continue to need public support. This is about a significant effort to make human beings who are afflicted with craniofacial deformity play their full role in our society.
For people who are thinking about supporting the foundation, I would say do it. The difference that it made to me could only happen because people donate. And so please do, please support them.
There it is. That will give you some insights into what we do, what our day-to-day activities look like. Before we continue, I just want to introduce our team. We're a tiny team. So my name is Barbara. I head up the foundation, and I've got the team sitting at the front here. If you could just stand up, I'll introduce everybody. So at the front here, this is Kerry, who's our fundraising manager. Then we've got Christina, our marketing manager. Matthew looks after administration, care packs, and also he's an IT guru, although he probably won't admit it. And then Michelle at the end is our accountant. So that's us in a nutshell, tiny team, 5 of us. So there's always a lot to do. And as mentioned in the video, oh, thank you. As mentioned in the video, we rely completely on public donations. We don't get grants, neither from the government or anywhere else. So it's really important that we share our vision as best we can. What we're really trying to achieve is that Craniofacial Australia becomes the go-to place. Anyone in Australia that has a diagnosis at birth, or prior to birth often, by the way, of a craniofacial deformity disorder, they come to us. We want to be the place to go to. We want to provide them with facts. So we will never give them medical advice, but we'd like to be able to point them in the direction. Where do they need to go? Where can they get help? And of course, we assist people. As you noticed in the video, we assist them with travel, with accommodation. We give them lovely care packs, which help people just know that they belong to our craniofacial community. So it's a great place to work, can I just say? And we do need support. So as I said, our vision is really, we've got so much more to do, so many bits and pieces to do. We help a lot of people interstate. There's room to help more. Anyone at all who's affected with a craniofacial deformity can come to us. And now I'd like to continue the main reason we're here, which is our panel discussion. So Dr. Ben Grave, craniofacial surgeon, will chair the panel. And I'll just give you a tiny bit of background from everyone. So Ben Grave has been a craniofacial surgeon since 2009, and he trained under Professor David, who, by the way, couldn't be here this evening. So he sent his apologies and wished us all well. So Ben trained at the Women's and Children's Hospital, as I said, and he continues to help paediatric and adult patients with the craniofacial deformity. Stan Gronthos, at the end there, you also saw him in the video. Professor Stan Gronthos is a National Health and Medical Research Principal Research Fellow. His research specialty is in stem cell biology and regenerative medicine. He's founder and head of the Mesenchymal Stem Cell Laboratory in the School of Medicine, Faculty of Health Sciences, University of Adelaide. Then we have Amanda Osborne, Dr. Amanda Osborne, who is a Senior Research Officer at the University of Adelaide. Her research is in the field of clinical neuropsychology. Both of these researchers are currently undertaking research in the field of craniofacial deformity. Then we have Bianca, and Bianca's here to talk about her lived experience. In her 21 years, she's undergone many, many surgeries, and she's had a difficult path. Now she's studying at Flinders University, and she's looking forward to a wonderful future. So it'll be interesting to hear about her experience and from our researchers. Thank you. Hand over to Ben.
Good evening and welcome tonight. This is a little bit out of our comfort zone, comparing or hosting a panel. But it just gives us an opportunity to meet various arms of Craniofacial Australia, the action part of things. For example, patient support with Bianca, or a person in Bianca's situation, and also the research side of things with Amanda and Stan. And then also just to talk about some of our education, which I've been doing at the Craniofacial Foundation with Indonesia. So I just wanted to start off by having an opportunity first to speak with Bianca, to give her lived experience and also to talk about her challenges that she's had to undertake since her birth and early life, and also now at university. Then also just speak to our researchers to give a summary of their stage in which they're at with their projects and what benefit it gives patients and what outcomes they're looking for. And then finally open it up to everyone in the audience just to ask us questions as we go along, because there's many people who have supported Craniofacial Australia for many, many years and know of the fantastic work of Professor David since the early 70s. And that is an opportunity to meet our researchers and also to visit the labs upstairs afterwards. So Firstly, I'd like to just start with Brianna. Brianna, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your journey and your experiences?
So I was born with a cleft palate, and my whole life I've been struggling with people just looking at me different, and I would always ask my parents about it. They would say even when I was a little baby, people would constantly be coming up to them, asking what was wrong with me and why I looked a certain way. And a lot of people don't want to seem rude, so in a different way they'll say it differently, like, oh, like even now when I'm at work, because I work at Macca's, people come through and they'll ask where my accent is from. So I feel like they're too nervous to say why they sound different. When I was younger, I struggled a lot to find friends, really, because no one would want to be. And I would constantly be bullied by people saying how I shouldn't look the way I do and that I just shouldn't sound like that, or I just sound different. Because no one was expecting one to be different back then. But as I grew up, I feel like I started to notice the stares more and the looks and the constant questions from people. And then I started having surgeries, and it got better, but I was still getting bullied a bit. And then I moved schools, and I met my best friends that they are now today, and they changed so much. They helped me, they comforted me, and like going into a new school was the most scariest thing I could ever experience, because I was scared because no one at the new school would have known what I'd been through. And so when my parents did tell me I was going to move, I was so scared. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to have to deal with more people staring. But I feel like now that I've grown up, I'm used to it in a way. I'm used to the looks. I don't really think much of it anymore, because I know myself that I am who I am, and that I am beautiful, and that I don't care about what people think of me, as long as I know that I look good. And I know my friends think I look good, and my family constantly tells me how I am so beautiful, and that's how I get through it.
Brianna, how many operations have you had over the years?
I've had 20 surgeries.
Brianna won't mind me sharing, but she had a cleft lip and palate. And Professor David's protocols are such that it's very regimented in that children who are born with a cleft lip, there are operations when they're 6 months of age, then 9 months for their palate, then constant appointments, haven't there been over the years, with speech therapy, social work. I remember Professor David always telling us and talking and saying that the parents are the most important people, especially the mothers, because they always bring their children to appointments. And also the fact that bullying is a big thing as well. During your teenage years, you touched on this a little bit, but did you have any support with some social workers or psychologists? Did that help at all to be so resilient and then obviously eventually flourish about how you are now?
Yeah, at my first school, I did have a teacher who I would go to during the day, and she would ask how I am doing, and we would just talk about everything so I could just let out how I feel about stuff. And then when I would, like some days I would have an appointment, and on those days that those teachers would talk to the students and just ask them to like be nice, and it helped a lot being able to have someone to talk to, because when you're like constantly being stared at and bullied, you don't really feel like talking to anyone because you don't want to burden people with how you feel. So you just want to keep it closed off and not make anyone worry about you. I feel like with the teacher, I was just able to tell her everything, and I was able to just tell her. And then even my mum and my dad, they were like the biggest supporters I've ever had. They would constantly be there for me if I was crying, or like they would go to the school themselves and tell like the principal that it wasn't okay, that people were being rude. I thank them every day for it.
One of the comments also I recall from Professor David is that they very much resilient, people with craniofacial deformity. They know they're different in different ways, but they're able to cope. And I think that type of resilience is reinforced with the constant interaction with the boss, who really encourages you over the years and gives parents a lot of guidance, and they trust him, and also they get a chance to have a plan for the future and what stages they need to go to so their children, as we saw in the video, flourish and become positive members, which Brianna certainly is. What are you studying at university now, Brianna?
I'm studying marine biology.
Oh, wow. I think we all wanted to be a marine biologist at one stage. We'll come back to Brianna because she's the focus of all of our work. With Amanda, could you let us know how your research is going, and also how you consider it has a good and positive impact for patients?
Thanks, Ben. And thanks, Bianca. I think sometimes when you're on the research side of things, you don't necessarily get to hear those stories, and that's why we do it. I think at the end of the day, I show up for work because I know that I can do something that will help people like Brianna get through life a little bit better and feel a little bit more supported. So just to go back a step there, I work in the School of Psychology at the University of Adelaide, and I've been working on craniofacial research now for about 7 years. And I will acknowledge my co-worker who is not here tonight, but that's Professor Rachel Roberts. And the reason that she's not here is she's currently, I believe, mid-flight from San Francisco, having just presented our research at the American Cleft Craniofacial Conference. So everything that I say is also due to Rachel and her work. So we've done a couple of different projects over those years. Firstly, we looked at unoperated or conservatively managed children with atopic synostosis. So our work is primarily in the craniosynostotic area. And so we were contacting families here in Adelaide and assessing them in terms of how they were going. So that was everything from cognition to behaviour to their psychological outcomes and functioning. And we did that for basically from almost infancy, so it was about 2 years actually, toddlers, through to about 30 years of age. We were able to get some participants to inform that research. So that was really fascinating and good in that whilst there were a few pockets of areas that, from a cognition perspective, that the children in particular were struggling with, generally they were actually doing as well as what we call the control, so that the other children of the same age and the same gender, that we had to do the same assessments. So it was really nice to see that they were actually doing okay. And there was some variation, definitely, and it's all very individual, but overall it was really nice. The other thing was that we looked at some psychological assessments, and it was interesting. Ben talked a little bit about resilience before, and the adolescents and the children that were actually doing some self-reported perceptions of how they felt other people perceived them. The children that had metopic synostosis actually felt better within themselves about how they looked and how they looked to other people. So there was that normal dip in adolescence and early adulthood when everyone starts to get worried about, you know, how they're looking to the other sex. So that definitely happened, but it was worse for the children that did not have metopic synostosis. So that work we've had published, it's been presented in Paris a couple of years back, and we then moved on to have a look at sagittal synostosis, which the first condition is the suture that closes down the front of the skull, and sagittal is the one at the back. So that's when they close either in utero or too early in life, thereby restricting the brain, which I think was on that video. So the sagittal synostosis group, very, very similar outcomes. We weren't specifically focusing on children here in Adelaide. This study was a national one, and it was done through, we recruited families through social media and through support groups, craniofacial support groups, and they were able to do a series of, quite a comprehensive series of online questionnaires about how they were feeling, and we got both the parents and the children to do them so that we could compare whether or not there were any differences in that. And for the children that were here in Adelaide, we were also able to do some cognitive assessments for them too. So that came out with very similar results, and certainly there's a term called executive functioning, which is basically how well or how flexible we are in our thinking and how good our working memory is, and whether or not we can inhibit some response that we would like to give naturally and give another. So at times, some of the results for that showed a little bit of difference. So I think that that's an area that we believe certainly needs to be investigated a little bit further. But again, from a psychological perspective, behaviourally, the children were doing really, really well. Most of them had received surgery. Many of them had received surgery from the team here in Adelaide. So, you know, for years, I think having done this research and watching families go, no, we live interstate, but yes, we came across to Adelaide because that's where we wanted to get our surgery done, because that's the best place to have it done. So that was convenient, thank you for that. It was convenient for us because that meant they were coming to Adelaide for referrals and we could see them. So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey, and it's lovely talking with families and the children involved and hearing their stories and actually being able to perhaps convey a little bit of information about what life might look for them in the future, that, you know, it's all going to be okay, and that whilst times are tough currently, or they can be tough, that, you know, as the years go past, it'll just even out, it'll be fine.
One of the interesting aspects of the research that Amanda's doing is looking at children that have been unoperated. So children that come along and they're born and they have some difficulty with the birth process because their cranial sutures are fused. So craniosynostosis is premature fusion of the cranial suture. And sometimes they present, and in that mild situation where, for example, there's the metopic suture here that Amanda mentioned, and often you don't need to do an operation because it's only a mild deformity, and it's at the point that there's no pressure on the brain. And it's very interesting looking at that, because understanding the natural history of the disease and seeing the outcome and being able to educate, is that right, the parents
absolutely.
about what to expect, because they are born, and with Brianna's lovely parents, you know, you're born and there's challenges and they want to know how to be able to cope with that. Is that how you've seen, Amanda?
Yeah, the uncertainty involved in these conditions, I'll say plural here, is immense. You know, in speaking with parents when they first get the diagnosis, you know, yes, there is some clinical support there, but they just don't understand what's going to come next. They don't understand they've got this beautiful baby, and they don't understand how their development will go. Will they be okay in school? Will they be bullied? You know, all of those really awful things. And it's about education. And actually, listening to Brianna's story, what struck me was when you mentioned that there was a really nice teacher, and that's great, but we should have better systems that allow you to have more formalised support. You know, there should be a way for you to be able to get more structured, you know, during that period when it sounded like it was horrific. So well done on getting through it and sitting here and being articulate and beautiful, as you said. So yeah, no, I think that's what I like, being involved with this organisation. That's what makes me come to work.
Stan, with your area of research, could you describe to us what that is in simple terms, and also the clinical relevance of it as well?
Yeah, and congratulations, Brianna. It's fantastic you being up here, and to the surgeons as well. They do a fantastic job with these kids. So really, I'm a basic researcher, scientist, and I've had an interest in stem cell work for probably more than 3 decades now. Being from Adelaide, I was involved in initial studies at the tail end of it, actually, looking at the bone marrow stem cells. And looking at these cells can be harvested and used for therapies in different types of cancers. And the work done here in Adelaide, where the whole world was using bone marrow transplantation, we developed an alternate method where we could harvest the stem or the blood stem cells from these patients without going straight into the bone marrow. So we could induce those stem cells to come out of the bone marrow into the blood, harvest it, and treat these cancer patients. So that kind of allowed me to kind of explore different areas of the bone marrow. And one of the areas that, going back 30 years, that was kind of undercooked was the skeletal system. So I was kind of one of the pioneers in the area of looking at what are skeletal systems, do they exist in the human system? If so, what do they do? So I spent the better half of 2-3 decades isolating these cells, characterising them, and they've eventually developed methods and translated that into the clinic for looking at non-union fractures and using these stem cells. I was also the co-inventor, discoverer of dental stem cells. So I did have an interest in the skeletal system in its entirety, but not so much in the cranium until I did a postdoctoral training at the National Institutes of Health at the NIH in Maryland, US. So that, again, a better appreciation for dental biology and craniofacial biology. At that time, when I came back to Australia to set up my own lab, I continued on with the skeletal stem cell work, but also looking at potential stem cells within the cranium, sutures. And being a basic researcher, I didn't really have an appreciation of what patients with craniofacial disorders were going through. And I ended up meeting some of those patients. And one was a little girl called Sophia, who had craniosynostosis, Soft-Hutchinson syndrome. And it was amazing. We did a little interview, Q&A together over Zoom, and she kind of inspired me in terms of, you know, these are real people with real problems, and we've got solutions potentially in the laboratory that could help them. So in my training and looking at how these skeletal stem cells tick, we identified these molecules within the cells that can dictate whether a cell becomes a bone cell or not. And we're able to use drugs that manipulate those factors to tell the stem cell inside the body or outside the body, if we extract it, to actually start making bone or suppressing its ability to make bone. So we've been using this technology to try and trick the sutures as they're overdeveloping and making too much mineral in craniosynostosis, trying to trick the suture stem cells to stop making bone and reverse that process. And the other side of the coin is using the same technology but reversing it, trying to make the cells make more bone. Those patients that have large cranial defects or people with large fractures that don't heal, we can use that technology to trick the cells to make them more active and make more bone and repair the bone quicker. So that's the type of research we're doing at present.
Stan, do you see a direct application of some of the materials that you could put onto humans to stop premature fusion of those sutures? And do you think that would be practical in the years ahead?
Yes, yes. And my ultimate goal, I suppose, is to put surgeons out of business, and dentists. But we think that we have the capacity, at least in an animal model with the same disease. So a lot of these craniosynostosis syndromic ones have specific genes which have mutations that cause this issue. And we've created mice that have the same genetic defect, and they have show phenotypes such as craniosynostosis and shorter stature and other things like polydactyly and other issues associated with craniosynostosis in general. So we've developed these mouse models, and others have as well, and we've been able to take our technology, identify those different targets, gene targets inside the skeletal stem cells or suture stem cells, and then apply the drug at the site using biomaterials that carry the drug and can dissolve in the body and release the drug. The biomaterial itself is inert to the patient, but what it does is localize the drug and release the drug at a higher concentration at the site that we're looking at, and it tricks the cells, it gives them a signal to stop making bone. And that's targeted, and it also is reversible, because we know when we apply this therapy in the mouse system with craniosynostosis prior to the sutures fusing or starting to fuse, and then wait and see, what we find is at the time when we expect the sutures to have completely fused, they remained open. And later down the track, because we've stopped the treatment, the sutures started to close again. So the process was reversible. Now, this isn't a small mouse where the timeframes are quite different. And in craniosynostosis, you're looking at months and years to at least allow the child to grow to an age 2 or 3, to allow the brain to grow to a decent size, at least 90+% what it should be. So if you can appreciate the lifespan of a mouse is only 2 years, but humans is 80 years. So this allows us to look at a very short time span to see how we can stop the fusion and then allow it to occur naturally, to allow the brain, in this case the mouse, to grow. So we think we're on the way, but unfortunately there's not a lot of large animal models that we could do this. So once we've done a proof of concept in the mouse system, it may have to end up going into early phase 1s in humans, where we do safety trials up front.
Sounds very interesting. Maybe we can open up to the floor to ask questions, but I'd like to just ask Bianca, how have you coped over the years of attending appointments here in Adelaide? Have you struggled travelling, or have you been sick and tired of attending often?
There was a lot of appointments, especially dentist appointments. I think I was there like every single week at some point. So I would definitely miss a lot of time at school, which did get a little bit hard sometimes because I would miss important work or tests that would mean a lot. Especially in year 10 or 11, I had my major jaw surgery and it made me miss my exams, which for me was a good thing. But for like teachers and my parents, probably not the best thing. But it meant I had less to worry about. Nobody liked it.
Well, you clearly did okay with your schooling to get there in the end, which is the main thing.
Yeah.
So it's one of the reasons that I got into this work is that, like everyone in South Australia, we knew of the great work with craniofacial, and Professor David's name has been well known. And at that time, I was at school at Ross Trevor College, and Prof David's son Benedict was in our year. So over the years, you do find that this type of work really does have a great interest because it's quite noticeable and it has a big effect on people's lives. So over time, this type of work is quite a privilege to do, and but the complexity of it is the hardest thing. And one of the things that I just gather really from talking tonight so far is that it just reminds me of how complex these conditions are, and often you don't really know what to do. And many people here we've worked with in the clinics and in the unit, and often children would come in, and I remember Professor David saying, with these complex, you're not too sure what to do. So often what happens is that you have a multidisciplinary team of health professionals. There could be a neurosurgeon, an ENT, maxillofacial, craniofacial, a plastic surgeon, and often together you work out how to manage these children, because a lot of this has been developed really over the last 40 to 50 years. And the main conditions that we treat at the craniofacial unit are cleft lip and palate, craniosynostosis, which is the premature fusion of the cranial suture, and often those children would have an operation in their first 3 to 6 months of life and then be monitored over the years. Sometimes they don't have another operation apart from just being monitored and supported and have speech therapy, have psychosocial assessment and support. Then there is the facial trauma, which we often see, unfortunately, due to violence, both on the sporting field or a road traffic accident or domestic violence. And those operations, you have a child or a young adult who perfectly progressing throughout their life, and one night they just have a catastrophic change and they present themselves with a head injury, facial bone injuries, and they need to be rehabilitated so they have good outcomes in the longer term and back into society. And we saw on the video the very rare ones from Southeast Asia, which is a huge passion of Professor David, because in those early days, and Ian Wall, who is his anaesthetist, travelled to Indonesia and looked after these children and brought them back to Australia and had those operations. So they're the things that I see which have been a big part of my working life and hopefully continue to be. Does anyone have any questions for any of the panel members? Well,
did everyone hear the question? Oh.
The question is, why doesn't Craniofacial have any government funding? We do, because a lot of our work is done within the Children's Hospital and at the Royal Adelaide. And there is a South Australian government funded scheme, which Professor David and the Premier back in the early 70s, Donald Dunstan, had set up. And the South Australian government scheme, and you'll hear this at the history night in 2 weeks with Professor David from the person himself, and that encourages 15 patients from Southeast Asia to come to Adelaide. And that government funded scheme has had a huge impact in that area of work. I've been very fortunate. The foundation has sponsored other surgeons, Walter Flapper and myself, to travel to Indonesia. And in Indonesia, we would follow these children up. And on occasions, the major craniofacial work couldn't really be done in that country. So often Stan spoke about synostosis, craniosynostosis. So there's 2 varieties. And the simple ones are done locally in Indonesia, and the more complex or syndromic type are coming to Australia to have their surgery. And that South Australian government funded scheme is just exceptional. And we hope and we can see that it will continue, which is a good government funded scheme, which makes a huge impact, not only on educating us here in Adelaide to do the more complex work, but also provides a good connection to Southeast Asia, which many of our education and our outreach clinics attend. So it has benefits both for the patient and for us.
Any other questions?
Thank you. How many surgical units does Craniofacial Australia support other than in Adelaide, across Australia and across Southeast Asia and the Pacific?
In Australia, we would support any unit that would reach out to us, because it's up to the unit to identify the patients that need our help. So if they come to us and require our help, we would assist them. In Southeast Asia at the moment, because of COVID, not a lot has happened. We're about to bring someone out from Pakistan. That's going to be quite a big venture on our part. But the units are still being supported. Ben mentioned, or in the video you saw, that we undertake education in Indonesia. So that's every Tuesday night. Professor David and Dr. Grave would sit with these Indonesian surgeons, and we're hoping to expand that in other regions in Southeast Asia as well. Bearing in mind that a lot of those units were established with the assistance of Professor David. So the model on which many units around the world were established was the Australian craniofacial unit that was set up here in Adelaide. It was the world's best, it really was. So we support anyone that comes to us if we can.
There is an application process where patients apply, and often the surgeon's interstate. So there are craniofacial surgeons in Brisbane and in Melbourne and Sydney and Perth that have contacted us at Craniofacial Australia just to provide patient support in travel, making appointments, and supporting them when they're having their surgeries done.
I just want to find out, what's the research going towards cleft lip and palate? Is that reasons, for the reasons why that their palates aren't developing? Because in our family situation, it hasn't been genetic. So how did this, how did Brianna have a cleft lip palate for something that I've heard it is genetic? So in this factor, why has this just occurred without being genetic? And why is this a once-off?
Yeah, I mean, if we understood the developmental process, it's almost, when you look at it with scientists' eyes, it's almost like a miracle. And the way it develops and the way the cells need to communicate to each other during every little step of development, through those early days and then weeks, subsequent weeks, it's mind-boggling how more things don't go wrong. It's just unbelievable. So some things are driven genetically, and other things are driven because some environmental factors may affect the development of that program, which is very ancient. It's evolved over millions of years. So if you ever look at embryos at a very early stage from different species, they virtually look identical until they get to a certain stage. But any environmental factor together with unknown genetic factors, and some things aren't specifically genetically based, so it doesn't mean that there's a mutation in a specific gene. It could be at the level of what they call epigenetics. It's an overriding system within the cell that controls how genes are switched off and on. And these can be affected by different things, like if your grandfather was a heavy smoker, that would affect how you developed in the womb. You know, if he was a heavy drinker or your grandmother or something like that. So epigenetics can influence on a generational scale how people develop down the track. So we're only starting to learn now how the environment affects the cells and how these epigenetic factors control the genes, not only due to known genetic mutation, but how these epigenetic factors are modified during development. It's a very complex way, but there are people working on these specific areas, on the skeletal system, on the muscle system. So eventually that knowledge will come together, but it's quite complex.
So will that mean that she will become genetic for her, so will her children
Not necessarily, because it's not a direct genetic link. That it may have been a random thing that happened just for her when she was developing. It may not occur again.
Thank you. Interesting, I think, for for parents as well, wondering why.
But these days we're doing a lot of genetic testing on people, and everyone's submitting DNA and getting their genes checked to see where their where the heritage is and stuff. But what's happening in the future, I suppose, that everyone will be identified in terms of the genome one day, and we'll get a better knowledge of why some people develop certain diseases, and even after birth and later in life, or someone's more prone to, say, type 2 diabetes or heart disease rather than someone else.
Stan, is there a group of or population group that are more prone to craniosynostosis?
I haven't looked into the literature in terms of the frequency of these, but I imagine in areas where there are genes that are known to cause craniosynostosis, if those are tight communities where you get a bit of interbreeding between populations and don't outbreed themselves, then you will perpetuate that gene. And that can be an evolutionary thing, like with thalassemia in the Mediterranean population, and another mutation that causes thalassemia in Southeast Asia, kind of been developed in those tropical areas like malaria as well. It gives you, that causes an issue, but that issue helps you survive diseases like malaria, like sickle cell anemia, help in that in African populations. So these things do develop, but it's usually around populations that don't breed out too far.
I think there was another question.
Linked to short stature. How far you got with that? Because that's, in our particular instance, is quite significant, and that's the first time I've actually heard that mentioned, being connected between the two. So, yeah.
Yeah, so what happens with the genes that are associated with craniosynostosis, and the one that we're working on, Softman-Shopson syndrome, which is caused by a gene called TWIST1. The TWIS1 is very important. It dictates to genes to switch off or on, and usually tells genes to be switched off. But it's important for what they call mesodermal development of the skeletal and muscle system. And that involves some of the cranial facial areas, but also the axial skeleton, the long bones, the spine and that. So it can affect those, and it can affect the growth plate areas. So those growth plates are really important in terms of allowing someone to grow longer bones, their fingers. So that's the TWIS1 gene. And when we did research initially, we were looking at TWIS1 as a regulator of skeletal stem cells in the bone marrow environment. Then we realised that there was a disease where a patient had a functional, dysfunctional allele in the TWIS gene that caused craniosynostosis. That kind of pushed us towards that disease because we're already working on that gene in the long bone.
So in a family, there's a possibility of somebody having both, or one sibling having craniofacial issue, the other one having that, and the other siblings nothing.
That's right, and it depends on the mutation, the prevalence of that mutation, in terms of which cells are being controlled by that gene. Some patients have different mutations. Other patients, we found one patient that actually had 2 mutations on 2 different genes. So you get 2 genes, 2 alleles per gene. And usually people have a mutation in one gene. But this patient had a mutation in both genes. And they were quite short and had other skeletal deformities apart from the craniosynostosis.
One question that I'd like to ask Amanda, one of the comments that you made was just collecting data, and also one of the comments as well from the floor is there are various units around Australia in which this type of work is done. What are the challenges that you have noticed or come across in trying to collect data?
A lot of it comes down to, I think, to communication and the relationship between the various units. So at the moment we're interacting with Melbourne. There's actually a couple of units in Sydney, Brisbane and also Perth, in terms of offering them the opportunity to join this research. We run out of Adelaide and primarily out of the St Children's Hospital, but by doing it this way, we're able to contact patients that have gone through the hospital system over the years in a more formalised way. So rather than it being people that self-select to actually join the research, you're actually sending information to every individual who's undergone particular surgery that we're interested in or have the condition that we're interested in. So it's the challenges, I suppose, are purely the relationship stuff in terms of explaining the benefits and getting things through ethics, the bureaucratic processes, the regulatory systems that are different between different hospitals. So it's all very, I say time consuming, but there are a lot of regulatory issues that we need to ensure so that we don't cause any harm, basically, when we're talking to people, and that each hospital is comfortable that what we're doing is good for them. So that's the primary area of the challenge.
Thank you, Amanda.
Question. There's so many groups of craniofacial deformities. What's happening with research on those that are extremely rare? Like my daughter's got Amblibix-Lefeiffer syndrome, and there's only about 90 in the world. So what sort of research is going towards something like that?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, because a lot of these rare diseases have been overlooked for a long time. I mean, there's some syndromes that we're looking at, and we're interested in a particular gene, and we approached a clinical group overseas to see if we can get any patient material. And only knew of 50 patients in the whole world. So it's quite rare. But the federal government recognises that there are a lot of rare diseases that there's no funding for, basically, unless there's foundations like this that are supporting it. So, you know, they're a blessing, these foundations, because they allow researchers to explore some of these diseases, but also the government, more recent years, has developed this the Medical Research Foundation that has a few rounds where they talk about funding rare diseases. So they don't have to be popular, don't have to be hitting a lot of patients, you know, the significance. I mean, the significance can be translated to one person. That's having a major impact on that person's life. So the government recognises an issue in that. Obviously, there's not enough money to go around, but they are funding rare diseases. But we kind of primarily rely on foundations like this to do this work.
First of all, I'd like to thank and commend all of you, and I found the panel really informative and moving, so thank you. My question was, tangibly, how can we as audience members help Craniofacial Australia in the best means and manner, and what assistance does Craniofacial Australia need to perform its mission?
Dr. Greg Miller, thank you so much. Thank you so much for asking the question. As I said earlier, we do rely on public funding. And I was about to get into that shortly, but I may as well now. We would hope that people that we've supported might reach out to us to do some fundraising on our behalf. And shortly we will be showing you a video about a family in New South Wales that have done exactly that. That's all we can do. It's awareness. Obviously, COVID hasn't helped, but that's why we're hosting this event tonight, just to get out there again. There are lots and lots and lots of charities, as you know. There are 500,000, no, 500,000? There are lots. I think there are 500,000 charities in Australia. It's ridiculous. So it's a tight market. It's really difficult to find corporates that will help us, except we do have someone here, a company which we'll talk about shortly. And usually people that assist us in a big way are people who have somehow been touched by it. So someone whose grandchild has had a facial deformity, someone who's had a facial trauma through a motor vehicle accident. It's just hard to do. So we're trying very hard through social media to create awareness, to talk about our research, to let people know about individuals such as Brianna and their journey and how difficult it can be. That's all we can really do. But anyone that would like to fundraise on our behalf or assist us, please reach out to us. We do get funding interstate, so a lot of our donors do come from interstate as well. So it's not just South Australians, because we work nationally. There's just a lot of work to be done. So thank you for the question, Greg. But on that note, Dr. Greg Miller has sort of joined our team through the Australian Dental Foundation, which he has created. So he'll be assisting with the patient that we're about to bring over from Pakistan, who's going to require complex dental work. So between Dr. Grave and Dr. Miller, this particular young girl will be looked after. So thank you for that, Greg. Thank you for the question. Are there any more questions? Yes. Let's just get the microphone. Sorry, it's a bit tricky. Yeah.
Hello. Well, that was very loud. Amanda, thank you so much. I read your paper on this topic, and it was very helpful for me searching for information about my daughter's diagnosis recently. I suppose the question for me is, as a parent who's recently just going through this journey with my daughter, is there a point where we can know more about Craniofacial Australia at the point of diagnosis? So across Australia, you know, children or families, they hear the diagnosis. I think that the gap is there where this is the next point to stop you going to Dr. Google and the dark area of the internet. I only stumbled on Craniofacial Australia just by meeting some of the team recently. And I think then that could help with the issue of support, because that's something that would have been really useful for me at the time of diagnosis. So is there any work with professionals across Australia to achieve that?
We're trying very hard to do that. So I have been in touch with all of the units around Australia. It's difficult sometimes to engage the surgeons to find out who their cleft coordinator or craniofacial nurse is. So it's been difficult, but we are actively working on that. We've found some assistance. We've built a lovely relationship with Ronald McDonald House. Thank you very much to Melissa and her team, because we've found a lot of families are staying at Ronald McDonald Houses around Australia, and we're getting referrals through them. So that's working, but it's all new. While we're a tiny team, we're also a relatively new team, with only one person having been here longer than 18 months. So there's a lot of work to be done, as I said before. So we are engaging the units. We're doing as best we can. We're looking for referrals. We're using Facebook. A lot of our referrals are coming through Facebook, where they're just seeing messages, or LinkedIn, where they're reading the story. That's all we can do. It's groundswell. That's all we can do. But we're trying very, very hard to do that. If anyone has got any ideas or contacts anywhere around the country, please let us know. We would love to reach out to them. Thank you for the question. It's just, yeah, we're working on it. In 12 months' time, I think we're going to be in a very, very different position. If there are no more questions, did you have anything else, Ben? So what I want to do here is, we talked about giving back. There's a short video I'd like to show you shortly. The Forsyth family are in New South Wales, and they reached out to Craniofacial Australia in the thick of COVID. So their little boy Vincent was born with sagittal craniosynostosis, which required cranial vault remodeling shortly after his birth. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what that's like, to have this tiny person with that issue, and that requires head surgery. I mean, it's so traumatic for the parents. So they flew to Adelaide, because this is where they had to come. This is where they chose to come for Vinny's treatment. And they had to stay here for 5 weeks during COVID. Imagine what that was like for them. They reached out to us, so at least we were able to support this beautiful family, help them get here, help them with their accommodation, help them with food. If anything they needed, they were able to reach out with us. So, and they've decided to give back, and they're doing it big time, by the way. So they've decided, Dad Shane and his brother Wes decided to undertake their first Ironman. So about a year ago, they started training. Last weekend, they participated in this Ironman. It's tough going. And they raised, how much did they raise in the end? Nearly $7,000. I mean, that's amazing. Yeah. And this is live streamed, so thank you so much to Shane and Wes and their family. We're just going to show a short video with their story.
Vincent who? Hello. Can you say thank you? Thank you. Say cranio. We are the proud parents of little Vincent Forsyth, who is now just shy of 2.5 years old. Our cranio journey started in January 2021, basically the day Vinny was born. He was born with quite a long skull. I think it 5 weeks old, we went for the ultrasound, and it was confirmed without any other scans. It was fairly obvious. He had the ridge at the back of his skull. We knew from then straight away surgery was going to be our only choice. Everything seemed to be happening very quickly, having a newborn son. And then he had surgery. We hadn't had a newborn in the house for a long time. We have now a 10-year-old and an almost 9-year-old, so we were not fluent in baby.
No, definitely.
So with Shane's surgery, it was fairly emergent. We didn't have time to wait for the public health system because he was off work for
3 months.
3 months. We were also freshly engaged and planning a wedding. When Shane needed surgery, that took our house deposit and our wedding money and everything else in between. So we weren't really in a great financial position, but we also didn't want to compromise the quality of care and the quality of surgery we wanted to give Vinny. So I was just searching for options and lots of tears and emotions, and we really didn't know. We just didn't know. We had a consult at another hospital in Sydney. They were great, but when we left, it just wasn't, I just didn't feel it. I just said, I don't think that's where I want to go, but I want to weigh up some more options first. By this stage, I'd been in touch with other mums from around Australia who were raving about the Adelaide hospital, the foundation, just how flawless and seamless the whole process was from start to finish. But then that's how I come across Craniofacial Australia. I remember browsing the website and noticing something about financial assistance, which Shane and I are very proud people.
We're very reluctant to do it.
We kind of run out of options. We touched base with the people at Craniofacial Australia, and it was almost like instant relief. Like, it didn't take long for them to say, yep. And like I said, at this stage, we paid for the surgery, we'd cancelled our wedding, we don't own a home. We had a lot of outgoings, and Shane was off work on income protection. I was nursing a 6-month-old baby. I couldn't go back to work yet. It was just quite a lot. So when we got the email that there was financial assistance,
it was a weight off the shoulders.
Very much. We were embarrassed to have to ask to do it, but it helped. So after all the traveling, the surgery, we were finally home and we did it. Vinny was on the mend. Shane was able to walk again after his surgery. Things were looking better. And a friend of his was doing triathlons. The main reason we wanted to do a fundraiser for the foundation is we know we're not the only family out there facing the same struggles, and if we can give even a little back to help the foundation continue helping other families, and that's a success in itself. While we've got the opportunity as well, we just wanted to thank you again, not only for the financial assistance, but just the support in general. It really was the darkest and toughest fight we've had to date. When it involves your children, it's just hard. It's just really hard. And
without Cranio Australia, we wouldn't have been able to get this done and had it as successful as it has been for his recovery. What can I say? He's a crazy 2-year-old that is just the lot of our lives.
So thank you. It really, really means a lot. Say bye.
Bye.
Wave.
Wave. Say bye-bye.
Wave.
So that's what we're looking for. People that are invested and people that understand what a difficult journey it is for these families. Thank you so much to the Forsyth family. And on that note, there are just a couple of other things. You will have received a little bag. We'll get back to you shortly. In your bag, you've got a couple of flyers. So one of them is for the History Festival event that Ben alluded to. So that's in a couple of weeks' time. Is it 2? Yes, 2 weeks' time. Oh my gosh. So Professor David, we're hosting the event at St Peter's Town Hall, and Professor David will be giving a 2-hour talk on the history of the Australian Craniofacial Unit. He will talk about the overseas trips. He will talk about the lay of the land politically. How were we able to create the world's best unit in little old Adelaide? And it was the world's best unit. So that'll be a very interesting evening. It's free to attend, so add that to your calendar. If we're oversubscribed, which I think we might end up being, we'll probably do a follow-up event in a couple of months. So please book. But the most important one, this is where we can really get your support. This is your invitation. Just note the date for our Winter Wonderland long lunch. So that's at the end of July, and you might have footy on that Sunday lunchtime. I think you need to forget about the footy on that day and come along to our lunch. It'll be at Veal Gardens. It's a really important event for us. Really, really important. We'll have silent auction, the usual things. Hopefully it'll be a fun afternoon. The food will be great. The company will be amazing. We'd really appreciate your support. If you can get a table along or invite a couple of neighbours, that would be really, really wonderful. It would be greatly appreciated. So put it in your calendar, please. And I just wanted to thank a few people who have come along today. So we've had quite a few supporters. Just let me get my list. We won't get everyone to stand up. There are lots of them. I mentioned earlier that Melissa Monkhouse and her team at Ronald McDonald House are supporting us, and that's how we'll have access to these families if we're not getting those referrals directly from the hospitals. So that's where we've started, and it's gaining momentum nationally. So that's fantastic. Peter Cox is here from Gelista Gelati, who supported us at a number of events with their amazing gelato. So please, if you're out there and you can see it at Foodland or wherever it is, it's amazing ice cream. And I mentioned earlier Dr. Greg Miller from the Australian Dental Foundation, who's about to support us with one of our international patients. I'm grateful that he's here this evening and supporting us. Sue Redman has supported a number of our events over the years, and recently some of our smaller events. Watch this space. We're hoping to do something as well as the winter event, hopefully a Melbourne Cup event. That's the plan. We'll see how we go with that. And then we've got the lovely big team, our ongoing supporters from Refined Real Estate. Where's Victor? Snuck out, came back in. Has he gone out again? Oh, pardon? He's okay. Oh, he went and he sort of came back. He's unfortunately had to go again. We've had an ongoing relationship with Refined Real Estate for about 6 years now, and their staff donate to us every month, I think, and those funds are gathered. They're given us to us once a year, and thousands of dollars that we get from this wonderful, wonderful group of people. So his team include Cheryl, who's unfortunately not here this evening, Alex, Paul, Noah, Sam, Ian, who's also our Father Christmas for our Christmas event, who's there, Enrique, Julia, Chloe, Raoul, Helen, and Lorene. I hope I haven't missed anyone. They're an amazing team and very inspiring. Thank you so much for all of our supporters. Thank you. And finally, we'd like to thank our panel. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. I can't believe it, we are right on time. Who would have thought? I wasn't expecting it. Look, thank you so much for coming this evening. We really, really appreciate your support. At least now you know what we're doing, where we're going, and the amazing people that are working behind the scenes with us. We also have a couple of our board members here tonight. There's David Smith. I'm not sure if Nick Pine is here. He was going to come. No, he probably didn't make it. Obviously, Ben's on our board. The others unfortunately couldn't make it. So thank you again. The lab tours are starting shortly. And if you're doing a lab tour, you go and see Rose just there. And otherwise, food and drinks will still be served for another half an hour. Enjoy the rest of the evening, mingle, and thank you so much for coming along. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
The bush has lost a hero, and we all remember him. He was our mate, he was the king. We're missing Slim, missing Slim. Scotty is a mountain man, hot as snowy granite. When Pop came on the radio, I swear I saw a tear. His life was a movie, Slim Dusty was the soundtrack, but he never thought the end was ever quite so near. Missing Slim, missing Slim. Bush has lost a hero, and we all remember him. He was our mate, he was the king. Missing Slim, missing Slim. On the plains in Kippamanati, to the end of the Canning Stockton, the Three Rivers and at Callahan's, and out to Camelot. Guru Station, Charleville and Isa, where the rain still tumbles down back there. Nulla Creek. Missing Slim, missing Slim. Bush has lost a hero and we all remember him. Missing Slim, missing Slim. Australia's lost a legend and we all remember him. He was our mate, oh, he was the king. Missing Slim, missing Slim, missing Slim. We're all missing Slim, oh, they're missing Slim. Oh, missing Slim, oh, we're missing Slim. Jesus the King, he is amazing, soothing and saving. All the Bible stories lead to him. Hey-oh, hey-oh, hey. God gets the glory, Jesus the King. Oh, hey-oh, hey-oh, hey. All the Bible stories lead to him. Amazing, soothing and saving. All the Bible stories lead to him. Hey, hey, oh, hey. God gets the glory, Jesus the King. Oh, hey, hey, oh, hey. All the Bible stories lead to him. Hey, hey, oh, hey. God gets the glory, Jesus the King. Oh, hey, hey, oh, hey. All the Bible stories lead to him. Bible in Ephesians chapter 4 verse 32. God says be kind to one another. God says be kind to one another. Can you do it with me? Here we go. In the Bible in Ephesians chapter 4 verse 32. God says be kind to one another. God says be kind to one another. Can you do it on your own? Off we go. Now, in. That's good. God says be kind to one another. Last time. God says be kind to one another. And God said the sun should shine, the rain should fall, the flowers should grow. And God said the birds should sing, and it was so, was so. And God said the grass should grow, the trees bear fruit, the wind should blow. And God said the stream should flow, and it was so, was so. And God said the sun should shine, the rain should fall, the flowers should grow, and